The blue-eyed Apache warrior riding with Chief Mangas's war party should not have existed. But there he was, 18-year-old fierce wolf, his blonde hair braided with eagle feathers, his pale skin marked with traditional Apache war paint, carrying a bow that had been carved by his adopted father's own hands. The other Apache warriors accepted him without question, because for 5 years, Tommy Williams had ceased to exist. There was only Fierce Wolf, son of Chief Mangas, defender of the Apache way of life, and one of the most skilled trackers in the territory. But today, September 12, 1873, everything Fierce Wolf had become was about to be challenged by the very people he had learned to call enemies. Because riding toward their hidden canyon camp was a U.S. Army patrol led by Captain Harrison Mitchell, carrying orders to find and return a kidnapped white boy to the civilization he no longer remembered or wanted. To understand how a 10-year-old farm boy named Tommy Williams became an Apache warrior named Fierce Wolf, you need to know about the day his world ended and his new life began. Because this story starts not with cultural conflict, but with a family's tragedy and a chief's unexpected mercy. It was August 3, 1868, when the Williams family wagon broke down 15 miles west of Fort Apache, Arizona territory. James Williams was moving his wife Sarah and 10-year-old son Tommy to a new homestead, carrying all their possessions and dreams of starting fresh in the frontier. The wagon's broken axle seemed like a minor setback that would cost them a day or two of travel time. They had no idea they were being watched by an Apache raiding party led by Chief Mangas, who had been tracking their movement for hours. The Apache were not on a killing raid. They were hunting for horses and supplies that had been stolen from them by other settlers. But when they saw the isolated family, the younger warriors saw an opportunity for revenge against the white settlers who had been encroaching on Apache land. The attack came at dawn on the second day, swift and brutal. James Williams died defending his family, Sarah Williams died trying to protect her son, and Tommy Williams watched both his parents die before losing consciousness from a blow to the head that should have killed him. When Tommy woke up, he was lying in an Apache camp, his head bandaged, surrounded by people he had been taught to fear as savages. Chief Mangas sat beside him, studying this pale, blue-eyed child who had survived what no member of his raiding party expected him to survive. "You are awake, little ghost," Chief Mangas said in English, using the name the Apache had given Tommy because of his pale skin and the way he had appeared more dead than alive. "Your family has gone to the spirit world. You are alone." Tommy, weak and terrified, could only stare at the imposing figure of the Apache chief. Everything he had been taught told him these people were his enemies, that they had killed his parents, that they would kill him too. But Chief Mangas surprised him. "I have lost my son," the chief continued, his voice heavy with a grief that transcended cultural boundaries. 3 moons ago, white soldiers killed him when he was hunting deer. He was 10 summers old, like you. The spirits have brought you to me for a reason." What Chief Mangas proposed was unprecedented in Apache culture and unthinkable in white society. He would adopt Tommy as his own son, raise him as an Apache, and teach him the ways of his people. It wasn't just mercy, it was an attempt to heal the hole left by his own son's death. Tommy's choice wasn't really a choice at all. He could accept Chief Mangas's adoption and learn to survive in a world completely different from everything he had known, or he could be left alone in the desert to die. At 10 years old, survival instinct overcame everything else. The transformation from Tommy Williams to Fierce Wolf didn't happen overnight. For months Tommy struggled with grief, fear, and complete cultural displacement. He didn't understand the language, the customs, or the daily rhythms of Apache life. The other children viewed him with suspicion and curiosity, while the adults watched to see if this white child could truly become one of them. Chief Mangas was patient but firm. He assigned an Apache woman named Ayana, whose own children had died in a cavalry attack, to teach Tommy the basics of survival. She became his new mother, showing him how to find water in the desert, which plants were edible, how to track animals, and how to move silently through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate. The language came first. Tommy was young enough that his mind absorbed Apache words and concepts with surprising speed. Within 6 months, he was thinking in Apache more often than English. The cultural lessons were harder, learning to see the world through Apache eyes, understanding their relationship with the land, their spiritual beliefs, their codes of honor and warfare. But the most difficult transformation was psychological. Tommy had to learn to see white settlers not as his people but as invaders. He had to understand that the Apache weren't savage killers, but people defending their way of life against systematic destruction. Chief Mangas helped him process this by explaining the history of Apache-white conflict from the Apache perspective. "Your people see us as savages because we fight to protect our land," Chief Mangas explained during one of their many conversations. "We see your people as thieves because they take what doesn't belong to them and kill anyone who resists. Both sides have reasons for what they do. But now you must choose which side you understand." By his second year with the Apache, Tommy had stopped correcting people when they called him Fierce Wolf. The name had come from his ability to track wounded animals through terrain that confused even experienced Apache hunters. His blue eyes, which had initially marked him as an outsider, became an asset in scouting and hunting. By his third year, Tommy was participating in raids against white settlements. Not as a warrior yet, but as a scout and messenger. He learned to watch white farmers and soldiers with Apache eyes, seeing their patterns, their weaknesses, their habits. The boy who had once been Tommy Williams was helping plan attacks against people who looked like his birth family. The psychological transformation was complete by his fourth year. When Apache warriors told stories around the fire about battles against white soldiers, Fierce Wolf cheered for Apache victories and mourned Apache defeats. When other tribes spoke of the expanding white settlements, he felt the same sense of threat and anger that his adopted family felt. Chief Mangas watched this transformation with satisfaction and occasional concern. He had wanted to replace his lost son, and in many ways he had succeeded. Fierce Wolf was becoming everything an Apache warrior should be: thick-skilled, brave, loyal to his people, dedicated to defending Apache lands. But sometimes in quiet moments, Chief Mangas wondered if he had done the right thing in erasing a white child's identity so completely. By September 1873, Fierce Wolf was 18 years old and had become one of Chief Mangas's most trusted warriors. He could track enemies across desert terrain that left no footprints. He could survive for weeks with minimal water and food, and he could fight with the skill and ferocity that had given him his name. To everyone who knew him, he was Apache through and through. But the outside world had not forgotten Tommy Williams. Sarah Williams had a sister in Missouri who had been writing letters to the army for 5 years, demanding that they find her nephew and return him to Christian civilization. The pressure had finally resulted in a formal search mission led by Captain Harrison Mitchell, with orders to locate and recover the Williams boy, using force if necessary. Captain Mitchell's patrol included 12 soldiers, 2 Apache scouts who had agreed to work with the army, and a translator who spoke fluent Apache. They had been tracking Chief Mangas's band for 3 weeks, following old campsites and information from other Apache who had been captured or surrendered to reservation life. The collision between Fierce Wolf's 2 worlds came on a bright September morning when Apache scouts brought word that soldiers were approaching their hidden canyon camp. Chief Mangas called his warriors together to plan their response, and Fierce Wolf took his place among them without questioning his role or his loyalty. "The soldiers seek something specific," reported the scout who had been watching them. "They carry papers and speak much about a white boy stolen years ago. They believe he is with us." Chief Mangas looked directly at Fierce Wolf, and in that moment both of them understood that the life they had built together was about to be tested in the most fundamental way possible. The army wasn't just looking for any white captive, they were looking for Tommy Williams, whose existence Fierce Wolf had buried so completely that he barely remembered that name. "They seek Ghost Boy," Chief Mangas said, using the original Apache name they had given Tommy. They believe they can take him back to their world. The chief's voice was steady, but Fierce Wolf could see the pain in his eyes. What do you choose, my son? It was the first time in 5 years that Fierce Wolf had been forced to acknowledge his white origins. Standing there surrounded by Apache warriors who had become his brothers, looking at Chief Mangas who had become more of a father than his birth father had ever been, the question seemed absurd. I am Apache, Fierce Wolf replied without hesitation. I have no other world to return to. These soldiers are enemies of our people. We fight them as we fight all enemies. But even as he spoke those words, something uncomfortable stirred in the depths of his memory. Images he had buried began to surface. A woman with kind eyes singing lullabies, a man teaching him to whittle wood, a farmhouse with white curtains that moved in the morning breeze. Tommy Williams had been declared dead years ago, but he wasn't completely gone. The battle, when it came, was swift and decisive. Chief Mangas's warriors had chosen the perfect defensive position, with high ground and multiple escape routes. Captain Mitchell's patrol was skilled and well-armed, but they were outnumbered and fighting in terrain they didn't understand. Fierce Wolf fought alongside his Apache brothers with skill and fury, using his knowledge of white military tactics to help anticipate the soldiers' movements. At one point he found himself face to face with a young cavalry trooper who couldn't have been much older than himself. A boy with blonde hair and blue eyes who looked like Fierce Wolf might have looked if he had grown up in white society. For a moment Fierce Wolf hesitated. The trooper was wounded, disarmed and clearly terrified. According to Apache warrior code, Fierce Wolf should either kill him quickly or take him prisoner. But something about the young soldier's face triggered memories that Fierce Wolf had thought were completely buried. The hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was enough for Captain Mitchell to notice. The captain had been searching for signs of the white boy he was supposed to rescue, and what he saw made him certain he had found his target. The blonde-haired warrior who fought like an Apache but hesitated to kill like a white man could only be Tommy Williams. Tommy, Captain Mitchell shouted across the battlefield. Tommy Williams, I'm here to take you home. The name hit Fierce Wolf like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 5 years, and hearing it now created a psychological crack in the identity he had so carefully constructed. For just a moment he remembered being a 10-year-old boy who had parents named James and Sarah, who had lived in a house with real windows, who had owned a dog named Rusty. But the moment passed quickly. Whatever Tommy Williams had been, Fierce Wolf was an Apache warrior in the middle of a battle defending his people. He turned away from the wounded soldier and rejoined the fight, helping his brothers drive the cavalry patrol back toward the desert. The immediate battle was won, but Chief Mangas knew it was only the beginning. Captain Mitchell had seen enough to confirm that the white boy was indeed with the Apache, and he would return with more soldiers and better planning. The peaceful life they had built in the hidden canyon was over. That night, as the Apache tended their wounded and planned their next move, Chief Mangas sat with Fierce Wolf beside their fire. For the first time since the adoption, they talked openly about the white world that Fierce Wolf had left behind. They will come again, Chief Mangas said quietly. More soldiers, more weapons, more determination. They believe they are rescuing you from savages. They will not stop until they take you or until we are all dead. Fierce Wolf stared into the fire, his mind churning with conflicting emotions. They can try to take me, he said finally. But I belong here. This is my family. This is my people. I fight for the Apache, not for white men who abandoned me to die in the desert. But you remember them, Chief Mangas observed. It wasn't a question. When the soldier called the name Tommy, you remembered the white boy you used to be. Fierce Wolf was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a pain he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. I remember a woman who sang to me when I was frightened, he admitted. I remember a man who carved me a wooden horse. I remember feeling safe and loved in a world I understood. But those people are dead, killed by Apache warriors. That boy died with them. I am not Tommy Williams anymore. Chief Mangas nodded slowly. You speak truth, but the white soldiers do not see truth. They see a white boy who needs rescue. They will use their guilt about your parents' death to justify taking you from the only family you have left. The conversation was interrupted by scouts bringing news that changed everything. Captain Mitchell's patrol had not retreated to Fort Apache as expected. Instead, they had made camp just 5 miles away and were apparently waiting for something. At dawn, the answer became clear: reinforcements. 3 companies of cavalry arrived at Captain Mitchell's position, along with a covered wagon carrying officials from the territorial government and a woman who claimed to be Tommy Williams' aunt. The rescue mission had become a major military operation with political implications that extended far beyond one missing boy. Chief Mangas called a council of his senior warriors to discuss their options. They could fight, but they were now outnumbered 3-1 by soldiers with superior weapons. They could retreat deeper into the mountains, but that would mean abandoning their traditional territory and living as fugitives. Or they could negotiate, trading Fierce Wolf's freedom for safe passage to the reservation. No, Fierce Wolf said when the third option was proposed. I will not be traded like a horse or a rifle. If they want to take me, they will have to fight for me. And if they take me, it will be against my will, not because my family sold me to them. But even as he spoke those words, Fierce Wolf could see the reality of their situation. The Apache could fight and die defending him, or they could let him go and preserve the lives of warriors, women, and children who depended on their protection. His personal choice was becoming a burden on the people he loved most. The decision was made for them when Captain Mitchell approached under a flag of truce, accompanied by the woman who claimed to be Tommy's aunt. Margaret Foster was a thin, severe woman in her 40s, who had traveled from Missouri with the absolute conviction that she was rescuing her nephew from a fate worse than death. "Tommy," she called out, when she saw Fierce Wolf standing with the Apache warriors. "Oh dear God, Tommy, what have they done to you?" Looking at this stranger who claimed to be his family, Fierce Wolf felt nothing but mild curiosity. She was clearly white, clearly civilized, and clearly horrified by what she saw as his transformation into a savage. But she meant no more to him than any other white woman he might encounter in a raid. "I am Fierce Wolf," he replied in English, his voice steady and calm. "I do not know anyone named Tommy. You have come a long way to find someone who does not exist." Margaret Foster began to cry, which surprised Fierce Wolf. Apache women grieved with dignity and strength. This woman's tears seemed weak and manipulative. But as she spoke, trying to remind him of details from his childhood, something unexpected happened. Memories began to surface with startling clarity. "You had a wooden horse," Margaret said through her tears. "Your father carved it for your 6th birthday. You carried it everywhere. You named it Thunder because you said it could run faster than storm clouds." Fierce Wolf felt something twist in his chest. He did remember the wooden horse. He remembered carrying it in the wagon when they left their old home. He remembered clutching it during the Apache attack. And he remembered burying it near his parents' bodies before Chief Mangas took him away. "You used to sing a song about a mockingbird," Margaret continued. "Your mother taught it to you. You would sing it when you were scared or sad. Do you remember the song, Tommy?" The memories came flooding back with devastating force. Not just the song, but the feeling of his mother's arms around him while she sang it. The safety of being small and protected and loved unconditionally. The simplicity of a world where right and wrong were clear, where family meant people who looked like you and shared your blood. For the first time in 5 years, Fierce Wolf felt the psychological foundation of his Apache identity begin to crack. He wasn't just Fierce Wolf, Apache warrior. Somewhere deep inside, carefully buried but not completely dead, was Tommy Williams, white boy who had loved his parents and missed them every day for years before learning to stop missing them. "That boy is dead," Fierce Wolf said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. "I buried him with his parents. I am Apache now." Captain Mitchell stepped forward, sensing the moment of vulnerability. "Tommy, listen to me. I understand that these people have become your family. I understand that you've learned to care about them. But you belong with your own people. You deserve to have a life in the world you were born to. This is the world I was born to, Fierce Wolf replied, but even as he spoke he could feel the certainty slipping away. The white world threw me away. Chief Mangas saved me. The Apache gave me life when my own people left me to die. Your people didn't leave you to die, Margaret Foster said desperately. I've been searching for you for 5 years. The army has been looking for you. We never gave up hope that you were alive. You have family who love you, who want you to come home. Home. The word hit Fierce Wolf harder than he expected. He had thought of the Apache camp as home for years, but Margaret's use of the word triggered memories of a different kind of home. A place where he had belonged simply by being born, where he had been loved without having to prove himself worthy, where his future had been certain and safe. Chief Mangas had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding of what was happening to his adopted son. He could see the psychological battle being fought in Fierce Wolf's mind, the collision between two identities that had been kept separate for years. Fierce Wolf, Chief Mangas said quietly. Look at me. When Fierce Wolf met his adopted father's eyes, Chief Mangas spoke words that changed everything. I took you because I had lost my son, and my heart was broken, the chief said. I gave you our ways because I wanted you to survive and be strong. I called you my son because I loved you and wanted you to belong. But I have always known this day might come. Fierce Wolf felt something break inside his chest. You are my father. These are my people. I choose to stay with you. And I have been proud to call you my son, Chief Mangas replied. But choose not from fear or obligation. Choose from understanding of who you really are. The question that Chief Mangas was really asking was profound after 5 years of living as an Apache. Who was Fierce Wolf really? Was he Tommy Williams pretending to be an Apache, or was he truly an Apache who happened to have white skin? The answer when it came to him was more complex than he had expected. He was both. Tommy Williams had not completely died in the desert 5 years ago. He had been sleeping buried under layers of Apache training and identity. And Fierce Wolf was not just a costume he had put on to survive. He had become a real part of who he was. Standing there between two families, two cultures, two completely different futures, Fierce Wolf realized that he would have to choose not between right and wrong, but between two different kinds of love, two different ways of belonging. Margaret Foster was still crying, still pleading with him to remember who he used to be. Captain Mitchell was explaining the good life he could have in white society, the education, the opportunities, the safety of civilization. The Apache warriors were watching silently, ready to fight to keep him if that was what he wanted. But Chief Mangas was offering him something that neither the white officials nor his Apache brothers could: the freedom to choose his own identity without guilt or obligation. I will go with them, Fierce Wolf said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. Chief Mangas nodded slowly, as if he had expected this decision. Margaret Foster sobbed with relief. Captain Mitchell looked satisfied that his mission was succeeding. The Apache warriors looked confused and hurt. But Fierce Wolf wasn't finished speaking. I will go with them, he repeated. But not because I am Tommy Williams returning home. I go because I am Fierce Wolf, Apache warrior choosing to explore the white world that I left behind. If I find that I belong there, I will stay. If I find that I belong here, I will return. But I will not be forced by either side to be someone I am not. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely but gave everyone something they could accept. Margaret Foster would get her nephew back, even if he insisted on maintaining his Apache identity. Captain Mitchell could report that the rescue mission had succeeded. Chief Mangas would not lose his son to force or coercion, but to a free choice that honored both of his identities. The transition back to white society was more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Tommy, for that was what everyone insisted on calling him, had to relearn how to live indoors, how to eat with utensils, how to wear white man's clothing, how to speak only English. But more challenging than the practical adjustments was the psychological adaptation. White society expected him to be grateful for his rescue and eager to rejoin civilization. They wanted him to denounce the Apache as savages who had held him captive and express relief at being returned to his proper place in the world. Instead, Tommy spoke respectfully of Chief Mangas as his father, described Apache culture with admiration, and made it clear that he considered himself Apache despite his white skin. Margaret Foster tried to provide a loving home, but she couldn't understand the young man her nephew had become. She saw his Apache training as damage that needed to be healed, his cultural identity as confusion that needed to be corrected. She wanted Tommy Williams back, but Tommy Williams was gone forever. The boy who had returned to white society was something new, a person who belonged fully to neither world but understood both deeply. He could survive in the desert like an Apache, but he could also read and write and understand white customs. He could see the strengths and weaknesses of both cultures from the inside. After 6 months of trying to live as Tommy Williams, he made another choice that surprised everyone. He asked to return to Chief Mangas, not as a runaway or a captive, but as a cultural bridge between two peoples who were destroying each other through misunderstanding. "I want to help them understand each other," he explained to Margaret Foster. "The Apache are not savages, and the white settlers are not all enemies. But both sides see only what they fear instead of what they could learn. I can help them find another way." Margaret Foster was heartbroken, but she could see that the young man she had tried to save was determined to save others. With great reluctance, she agreed to let him return to the Apache, with the understanding that he would also maintain connections to white society. Tommy Williams, who had become Fierce Wolf, who had become Tommy Williams again, who was now something entirely new, spent the rest of his life serving as a translator, negotiator, and cultural bridge between Apache and white communities. He married an Apache woman and raised children who learned both cultures. He helped negotiate treaties that protected Apache rights while allowing for peaceful coexistence with white settlers. His story became legendary on both sides of the cultural divide. To the Apache, he was proof that identity was about choice and loyalty rather than blood and appearance. To white society, he was an example of how understanding and respect could overcome fear and prejudice. Years later, when asked whether he considered himself white or Apache, Tommy would smile and give the same answer he had given since returning to Chief Mangas. "I am both, and I am neither. I am what happens when two worlds come together with love instead of hate." His life proved that cultural identity is not determined by birth or appearance, but by choice, experience, and the willingness to see beyond the boundaries that divide us. In a time when most people believed that racial and cultural differences were insurmountable, Tommy Williams, also known as Fierce Wolf, showed that it was possible to belong to multiple worlds simultaneously, and to use that belonging to build bridges instead of walls. The Apache adoption story reminds us that family is about love and choice rather than blood and tradition. It shows us that identity is complex and fluid, shaped by experience rather than genetics. And it proves that even in the midst of cultural conflict and historical trauma, individual acts of compassion and understanding can create possibilities for peace that seemed impossible. Tommy Williams started life as a white farm boy, became an Apache warrior, and ended as something entirely new. A living example of how two different peoples could find common ground through mutual respect and genuine understanding. His story offers hope that even the deepest cultural divides can be bridged by people willing to see the humanity in those who seem most different from themselves. The impact of Tommy's story extended far beyond his own life and the immediate communities he served. His work as a cultural mediator became a model for other frontier settlements struggling with similar conflicts between white settlers and Native American tribes. Government officials and military leaders began seeking his advice on how to negotiate peaceful agreements that honored the rights and needs of both cultures. Tommy established the first formal cultural exchange program between Apache communities and white settlements in Arizona Territory. Young Apache men would spend months living with white families, learning English and understanding European American customs, while white settlers would live with Apache families, learning survival skills and understanding indigenous perspectives on land use and natural resource management. These exchanges, which came to be known as the Williams Protocol, proved remarkably effective at reducing violence and misunderstanding between the two communities. Participants returned to their home cultures with a deep appreciation for the complexity and humanity of people they had previously seen only as enemies or obstacles. The success of Tommy's mediation work caught the attention of territorial officials, who offered him positions in the government as an official translator and cultural liaison. Tommy accepted these roles, but always with the understanding that his loyalty was to both communities equally, not to any particular political agenda or military objective. His most challenging assignment came in 1879, when tensions between Apache bands and the U.S. military reached a breaking point over the government's plan to relocate all Apache people to a single reservation in New Mexico. The plan would have forced Apache bands to abandon their traditional territories and sacred sites, effectively ending their cultural connection to the land. Tommy spent months traveling between Apache camps and military installations, carrying messages, explaining positions and searching for compromise solutions that both sides could accept. His work was dangerous. He was viewed with suspicion by military officials who questioned his loyalty to white interests, and by some Apache leaders who saw his willingness to negotiate as a betrayal of indigenous rights. The breakthrough came when Tommy proposed a radical alternative to forced relocation, a series of smaller reservations that would allow different Apache bands to remain in their traditional territories while accepting formal boundaries and agreeing to peaceful coexistence with white settlements. The proposal required extensive negotiations with territorial officials, military commanders, and numerous Apache leaders. But Tommy's unique position as someone trusted by both cultures made him the only person capable of facilitating such complex discussions. The negotiations took place over 6 months in 1880, with Tommy serving as the primary translator and mediator. The process was exhausting and emotionally draining, requiring him to navigate between radically different worldviews while maintaining the trust of all parties involved. There were moments when the talks nearly collapsed, particularly when some military officials demanded complete Apache surrender, and some Apache leaders insisted on retaining full autonomy over their traditional lands. Tommy's most difficult moment came when Chief Mangas, now in his 70s and suffering from declining health, questioned whether Tommy's efforts to find compromise were weakening Apache resistance to white encroachment. The conversation took place around a fire in the same canyon where Tommy had been raised, with the same mountains visible in the distance where he had learned to hunt and track as a young Apache warrior. "My son," Chief Mangas said, using the same gentle tone he had used when Tommy was a frightened 10-year-old. "I fear that your desire to make peace between our worlds may cost us everything that makes us Apache." The white officials speak of reservation boundaries and government supervision. They want to turn us into white men with brown skin, living on land we cannot leave, following laws we did not make. Tommy listened carefully to his adopted father's concerns, understanding that Chief Mangas was voicing the fears of many Apache people who saw negotiation as the first step toward cultural extinction. When he responded, Tommy spoke with the wisdom of someone who had lived in both worlds and understood the costs of both conflict and compromise. "Father, I have seen what happens when our people refuse all negotiation with the white world," Tommy said. "I have seen Apache families driven from their homes, Apache children separated from their parents, Apache warriors killed defending land that was already lost. Fighting may preserve our honor, but it will not preserve our people." "But what you propose is not preservation," Chief Mangas replied. "It is slow death. You ask us to accept boundaries drawn by white men, to follow laws made by white governments, to live under the protection of white soldiers. How is this different from surrender?" Tommy's answer became the foundation for the final negotiations and the key to understanding his vision for Apache survival in a changing world. It is different because we choose it freely, rather than having it forced upon us, Tommy explained. It is different because we negotiate from a position of dignity, as equals seeking mutual benefit, rather than as defeated enemies begging for mercy. And it is different because we retain the right to maintain our culture, our language, our spiritual practices, and our connection to the land, even if we must accept limitations on how we use that land. The conversation with Chief Mangas helped Tommy clarify his own thinking about what kind of future was possible for Apache people. He wasn't seeking to preserve Apache culture unchanged. That was impossible in a world where white settlement was expanding rapidly. Instead, he was working to ensure that Apache culture could adapt and survive within new circumstances, rather than being destroyed by those circumstances. The final agreement, reached in early 1881, established 5 separate Apache reservations in Arizona and New Mexico, each tailored to the specific needs and traditions of different Apache bands. The reservations were larger than what military officials had initially proposed, and they included provisions for Apache self-governance, protection of sacred sites, and continued hunting and gathering rights in designated areas. Most importantly, the agreement included formal recognition of Apache cultural rights and government support for education programs that would teach both Apache and white children about each other's cultures. Tommy had insisted on these provisions, arguing that lasting peace required mutual understanding rather than just enforced separation. The treaty signing ceremony took place at Fort Apache on March 15, 1881, with representatives from the government, territorial officials, military commanders, and leaders from all major Apache bands. Tommy served as the official translator for the ceremony, ensuring that every word of the agreement was clearly understood by all parties. When Chief Mangas signed the treaty, he looked directly at Tommy and spoke words that captured the complexity of what they had accomplished together. "My son," Chief Mangas said, "you have done something I thought was impossible. You have found a way for our people to surrender without being defeated, to accept change without losing ourselves. I do not know if this path will lead to the future our ancestors would have wanted, but I believe it leads to a future where Apache children will still know they are Apache." The implementation of the treaty proved as challenging as the negotiations had been. Tommy spent the next several years traveling between reservations, government offices, and white settlements, addressing problems, mediating disputes, and ensuring that both sides honored their commitments under the agreement. His work during this period involved everything from helping Apache farmers learn new agricultural techniques to explaining Apache water rights to white ranchers who wanted to use the same streams. He mediated disputes between Apache youth who wanted to attend white schools and tribal elders who feared the loss of traditional knowledge. He helped white doctors understand Apache medical practices, and Apache healers understand European medicines. The most difficult challenges involved conflicts between Apache people who supported the treaty and those who opposed it. Some Apache leaders, particularly younger warriors who had not participated in the negotiations, viewed the reservations as prisons and the treaty as betrayal. They organized resistance movements, conducted raids against white settlements, and tried to convince other Apache to abandon the reservations and return to traditional nomadic life. Tommy found himself in the impossible position of mediating between different Apache factions, while also maintaining credibility with white officials who expected him to help enforce the treaty terms. The situation became particularly dangerous when some anti-treaty Apache leaders accused Tommy of being a white spy who had betrayed his adopted people for personal gain. The accusation was painful because it contained just enough truth to be damaging. Tommy had indeed benefited from his role as a cultural mediator. He owned land, had steady income from government contracts, and enjoyed a level of respect and influence that would have been impossible for most people of either culture. But he had also sacrificed any chance of living a simple, private life, and he carried the constant burden of responsibility for decisions that affected thousands of people. The crisis reached its peak in 1884, when a group of young Apache warriors left the reservation and began raiding white settlements, claiming they were fighting to restore Apache freedom. Military officials demanded that Tommy help track down the raiders, while Apache leaders insisted that he protect the young men from military retaliation. Tommy's response demonstrated the wisdom he had developed through years of navigating between conflicting loyalties. Instead of choosing sides, he proposed a solution that addressed the underlying causes of the conflict rather than just its symptoms. Working with both military officials and Apache leaders, Tommy organized a series of meetings where young Apache men could voice their frustrations with reservation life, and white officials could explain the constraints they faced in implementing the treaty. The meetings were tense and sometimes heated, but they provided a forum for addressing grievances before they escalated into violence. More importantly, the meetings led to modifications in how the reservations were administered. Young Apache men were given more opportunities to leave the reservations for seasonal work, education, or cultural exchanges. Traditional Apache leadership structures were formally recognized within the reservation system, and provisions were made for Apache young people to learn both traditional skills and modern trades, giving them more options for their futures. The success of these efforts established Tommy's reputation as more than just a translator or mediator. He had become a bridge between cultures, someone who could help both sides understand not just each other's words, but each other's deepest values and concerns. As Tommy entered his 40s, he began to focus more on education and cultural preservation. He worked with Apache elders to document traditional stories, songs, and practices that might otherwise be lost as younger generations adapted to reservation life. He also worked with white educators to develop teaching materials that presented accurate information about Apache history and culture. His most ambitious project was the establishment of the first integrated school in Arizona Territory, where Apache and white children learned together in the same classrooms. The school faced enormous opposition from both communities: white parents who didn't want their children contaminated by Indian influences, and Apache parents who feared their children would lose their cultural identity. Tommy addressed these concerns by creating a curriculum that taught both cultures with equal respect and depth. White children learned Apache languages, traditional ecological knowledge, and indigenous history. Apache children learned English, European mathematics and science, and American history. But most importantly, all children learned to see both cultures as valuable sources of wisdom and knowledge. The school's success attracted attention from educators and government officials across the country. Within a decade, similar integrated educational programs were being established in other territories and states, using Tommy's model as a blueprint for cross-cultural education. By the 1890s, Tommy Williams had become a nationally recognized expert on cross-cultural relations and peaceful conflict resolution. He was invited to speak at universities, consulted by government officials working with other Native American tribes, and written about in newspapers and magazines, as an example of how different peoples could learn to live together. But the recognition and success never obscured Tommy's understanding of his fundamental identity. When asked in interviews whether he considered himself white or Apache, his answer never varied: "I am both, and I am neither. I am what happens when two worlds choose to understand each other instead of trying to destroy each other." Tommy Williams died in 1923 at the age of 65, surrounded by family members from both cultures and mourned by communities across Arizona and New Mexico. His funeral was attended by Apache tribal leaders, government officials, white ranchers and farmers, and hundreds of former students from his integrated schools. The eulogy was delivered jointly by Chief Mangas's son and by Margaret Foster's daughter, symbolizing the bridges Tommy had built between different worlds. They spoke of him not as someone who had abandoned one culture for another, but as someone who had proven that it was possible to honor multiple identities simultaneously. Today, the Tommy Williams Cultural Center in Arizona stands as a monument to his life and work. The center houses archives of Apache oral history, provides educational programs about indigenous cultures, and continues the work of building bridges between different communities. Its motto, carved in both English and Apache over the main entrance, captures the essence of Tommy's life. Understanding builds bridges that conflict cannot destroy. The story of Tommy Williams, also known as Fierce Wolf, reminds us that identity is not fixed by birth or determined by appearance, but shaped by choice, experience, and the willingness to see beyond the boundaries that divide us. His life proved that even in times of intense cultural conflict, individuals can choose to become agents of understanding rather than instruments of division.